Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good 2 a.m., whatever time it is that you're listening to this program. This is Tony here with the 706 podcast gang, here to discuss a film as we always do. This week we're doing Sean Baker's 2021 film, Red Rocket, sort of a dark comedy, drama, sort of mishmash hybrid sort of deal. Kirk is furrowing his brow here. That's a good start. We're off to a good start. I like this. Speaking of which, let's have my co-hosts introduce themselves. Let's go alphabetical order by last name. Keep it fun, keep it fresh.
We have to do math right now. What are you doing, Tony?
Math,
I know,
alphabetically.
I know. Kirk, how you doing, folks? I've missed you. I know you've missed me.
Anthony.
And thanks for doxing us, Tony. Now they'll know exactly what our last names are. At least they can speculate. I'm Connor.
And then we'll say our opinions on the film in the order of our social security numbers. I'll introduce the film briefly first. First of all, the premise of our program, if you've ever listened before, I don't know why you're listening to this particular episode, but hey, newcomers are always welcome. We have a vibrant, growing 706 community. Someday we'll reach the number in the name of our podcast, but probably not. So every week we discuss a film brought by one of the four of us, and we discuss it and try to determine whether it is one of the 706 greatest films of art all time. It is a growing canon. And this film, Red Rocket, is by Sean Baker, who, as of the time of recording, where this is late March, the Oscars were a few weeks back. And, if you follow film at all, you're aware that the film Anora won most of the major awards, directed, written, and edited by one Sean Baker, who's become one of kind of the preeminent of this, new crop of filmmakers, kind of currently on the scene, whose films are kind of growing in recognition and popularity over the past several years, kind of culminating in Anora. He'd been kind of an upward trajectory of notoriety for a while. He did films such as Tangerine, The Florida Project, and of course Red Rocket. Those are probably the biggest ones he's known for. So I thought it was a fitting, when we recorded the last episode and I pitched it, it was before the Oscars, but Nora certainly was very acclaimed at the time and nominated for a bunch of Oscars. So it seemed a fitting time to kind of go back and look at one of his other films, in this case, the one immediately preceding Nora. And before I turn it over to my co-host to kind of talk about what they thought of the film, I'll give a very general sort of synopsis. This is a movie about a Mikey. Damn, I'm forgetting. I can never remember a character name.
Mikey Madison.
Yeah, Mikey Madison.
Saber. Saber
Mikey
Davies.
Saber. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Mikey Saber is a porn star who is returning to Texas City, where he kind of grew up after some off-screen, unspecified issue or crisis or fall from grace in Hollywood where he lived. He's going back home, and no one's really very happy to see him. And as the movie progresses, we kind of find out why. This is basically a guy who is a bit of a troublemaker, you might say, a bit of a scoundrel, for reasons we'll discuss very shortly. But before we really dive into what actually happens in this movie, let's kind of open it up to my co-hosts. First of all, before I decide who goes first, Connor, you've seen it, but no one else has seen it. Is that correct? Okay. Let's have Anthony open it up. I'm really curious to hear what Anthony thinks of this film, and first of all, what is your kind of familiarity with the other films of Sean Baker, and how does this kind of fit in with his others?
Yeah, I can't say I actually don't even know how many he has, so I can't say I'm like super well versed because I don't even know that, or not well versed because I don't even know that. I saw Anora like everybody did, and I enjoyed a lot of it, but felt it didn't fully work for me, especially in the latter half of that movie. Though I enjoyed Mikey Madison's performance more than anything, and the humor of the first half of that movie, which felt very comparable to this. It almost felt like they could have been written at the same time or something. I've seen Tangerine because I remember in 2016, 2015, somewhere around that time, it just being talked about as the iPhone movie. Because he supposedly shot it on an iPhone. I've never looked into the validity of whatever that means or what that meant in terms of actually recording and the post-production process and all that. But I wasn't super enthralled with that movie either. But I've never seen the Florida Project. I don't know if he has any other things in the last few years. I think there's one other movie I saw of his about characters in New York, but maybe I'm mixing that up with someone else because I can't even remember the title. So my relationship is I've seen some stuff, but I don't have like a deep connection with him. I've so far I've never really had anything deeply resonant in terms of what he's done. And so I came to this, and I have to say is it was kind of weird because I actually knew a lot about this movie in terms of like individual scenes because I was listening to a podcast with Simon Rex years ago. And as I was watching this movie, I just remember this guy being interviewed and like describing the movie. So certain scenes felt like someone was explaining them to me just before they happened, which maybe robbed the movie of a little bit of something, like that little extra. At the same time, I was watching this and I was thinking, this is like a Tony AI like generated film because I was just thinking there's this thing whether it's Simon Killer, Uncut Gems, Good Time, and the Safdies also feel like a parallel or analog to this of these like neurotic, especially usually men, but these like kind of neurotic men who are so capable of lying as like a talent and an instinct that they start to believe their own worlds. And there's always these moments in Tony's favorite films like these in which they go with like a point of no return, where they refuse to let their world shatter until finally the credits come around and you kind of are left to imagine what their reckoning may be like, if it may ever even come. And I think there is something kind of interesting about that idea. I do love that as a kind of concept of a character study. And when it came to this, I absolutely loved Simon Rex's Davies as Saber in this role, especially in the first part, and especially at the end when the children of the person who's been supplying him weed comes to rob him of the money he's been making in this kind of planned arrangement, I found absolutely hilarious. I found him really funny and heartbreaking. But where the movie itself lost me is I feel like the middle section could be like 30 minutes shorter. I just feel like I got the point about him trying to work this relationship out with this 17, 18-year-old. I felt like I got the kind of general conception of who this guy was at this point. I felt like I understood what he wanted and that it probably wasn't going to happen the way he expected or the way he would have liked. And I thought there could have been something else to jilt him out a lot sooner. Maybe if that car crash happened a little earlier and that was some tension added to the movie or something, I don't know. But I just felt like for 2 hours and 10 minutes or whatever the movie it would have been great at an hour and 45. At 2 hours and 10 minutes, I was just left going, okay, can we get to it? Can we see what else is going on? Can something else kind of shake me into bringing me back to this little uh, coast of Texas City, which is kind of an area of Texas people don't usually think about, at least in my opinion. It's not the desert of like Hollywood that they typically show Texas to be like. It's this kind of green area that's actually quite beautiful at times, with the exception of the scarring of these power plants and oil refineries everywhere. And so the way it's shot and the way it features everything is kind of fascinating. And I love that there's characters who point out the violence of this like underbelly of this world around them, whether it's the Texas fields, the slave trade that once happened on that coast 150 years ago, and how Davies just does not recognize or register any of it. He just wants to live in his dream world and be there forever. And so there is something kind of funny. There's something honestly even charming. There's also something kind of I could understand why the people would be drawn to it and the way the film wants to draw connections between this fantasy world and this kind of Trumpian parallel. So I'm kind of searching around for all sorts of things because there are stuff I feel I could really highly, I don't know, recommend, but really highly applaud in the movie. At the same time, I felt like it was just okay. It seemed to need something else to me, or maybe it just didn't have it, and maybe I wasn't meant for the movie the way you probably were, Tony. And I'll just say my last favorite part is actually my favorite scene is the guy who pretends to be a Lonnie when he dresses up in the camouflage and goes to the mall. Like I'm curious what his full point was and everything about that. But anyway, I'll stop there so we can all talk.
Okay. No, that's a good way to open up the discussion, Anthony. He's already kind of talking about some of the major elements of the film that I'm sure we're going to dig into later. Definitely with some of the historical parallels that are drawn, kind of the Trump thing, which we can discuss later, and obviously the kind of the most uncomfortable aspect of the movie, which is Simon Rex's character, the middle-aged man, embarks on a relationship with this 17-year-old girl who works at the donut shop that takes quite a bit of focus in the plot, especially in the second half of the film. So definitely things we need to really kind of reckon with and dive into. But all right, Kirk, I got a bad feeling just from some of the preliminary comments and some of the facial expressions. This is probably not going to go well. But all right, Kirk, let's see. Let's see what you got for us. How did you feel about Red Rocket?
It's a fine film, really. I don't hate it. I think it has very interesting elements. It's well crafted. It's well shot. The locations are scouted, well scouted, and I like how there's just a level of care that kind of contradicts the shabbiness of the environment in the mechanics of it all. Like, for instance, when he's asking Strawberry to go to LA with him, there's a train, like a freight train, that's pulling into frame. And it's just, I think that actually happened in Nora too. But just the fact that he's like, you work backwards and you think like how that was done, and how many takes did they do? But and then maybe somebody will say, oh, that was a green screen or something. I don't think it was, but or when they're pulling in after this inciting incident that led to a pileup on the freeway, the camera is kind of situated in the driveway and you can see them pulling in from like a block and a half away. That's the thing about this movie. There's just these unobstructed like sight lines everywhere because it's so flat. It's a coastal, it's like a tidal basin, right? I think it's an interesting location. When I first like saw the beginning of the movie, I was kind of drawn to the heuristically or instinctively, I thought it was Louisiana with all the refineries, or I don't know what you would call those various infrastructure developments they're basically like oil refineries. And then there's a town called Lamarck, very French, but that area is essentially like Louisiana light. And it's interesting that it feels so separate from Houston, which is like the fourth biggest metro in the country. It's kind of this weird dynamic, but regardless, there were some things to be intrigued by. I did like Simon Rex's performance. I couldn't shake the thought that he's just like a budget Bradley Cooper. He does look a lot like Bradley Cooper at times, and he even talks like him in some of his manic cadences. But I don't know. Part of me wonders after a while, like what the appeal is of seeing people just live in squalor. And it seems to be like that, when you look at the Florida Project, and that Sean wants to show a side of America that's very sore covered and rusty and gangrenous. And it's like, at times you wonder, is this exploitative? Like, is he making fun of these people? I don't know his backstory, but like, does he just get his rocks off at looking at people in poverty? Because some of the decisions they make sense. I mean, within the larger socioeconomic context, you can kind of laugh at them because they are silly and they're stupid. And it's like, people going into porn, that sounds outrageous. Like most of us would never dream of doing that, even if we had the instrumentation to do so. But I mean, a way out of poverty, right? Like stolen valor, that's hilarious, but kind of speaks to a larger issue of trying to make money in whatever way you can. So I think there's this undertone of sadness that I don't necessarily know was intended to be perceived. But maybe that's just me, and maybe I'm just being too heavy-handed with the film. One thing I'll say is, I agree with Anthony. I think could have been, a little shorter. The plot felt, it just was like ambling along, and it just felt like, where are we going with this? One thing that I think would have made this movie really great is if, just the genders of the Lexi and Mikey characters have been switched. Everything else stayed the same. So the Mikey character is a female porn star coming back, and I think that would have been very intriguing. And then and then Strawberry's gender gets switched as well, but everything else is the same. And I think that would have landed in a different way. As it stands, it just feels like Sean Baker loves to create movies where women are objectified and have no real agency. I know people can be like, well, in Nora, she was mad that they made her go on a jet to Las Vegas. It's like, I don't know. It's hard for me to see much agency in those films. Many redeeming qualities with a lot of these female characters. It's just a very male centric point of view. That's what I'm saying. And so I think he could have done, more to challenge his own preconceptions and, kind of subvert our expectations, right? Like a female porn star. That would have been a really interesting film, I think. And then she's like grooming like this high school kid. Like that would have been cool. But alas, that's not what we got. Social issues aside, I don't know if there's enough here for me to say it sustained my interest for the 2:10. What was it? 2 hours 10. It was a fine film. Like I would say, I wouldn't say I disliked it. Tony, you're gonna have to go a little ways to tell me why this needs to be considered for the 706 greatest films. But I know you're up for the task, and maybe Connor has, gonna jump in from the top rope here. So we'll see. But those are just my thoughts for now.
Okay, very, very good. Not too bad. Could be worse. I will say Sean Baker has several films about female sex workers, at least 3 that I can think of. But I know you mentioned Nora, and you had your objections to that film. That's another conversation, but that's okay. Connor, you've seen this movie already, so I'm curious. I've seen this movie twice as well, obviously. How did you feel on your first viewing, and did your relationship with this movie change on a second viewing in either direction?
Thank you, Tony. And thank you guys for your thoughts, for laying the groundwork, because I was finding it hard to like how to begin with my feelings about this movie, because overall, kind of ambivalent, a little lukewarm. Okay, I watched it the first time. I'm fascinated. I'm like, okay, I had seen Tangerine. I thought I knew what I was going to expect. It seems very interesting. I like the mise en scène. We got the little references to history. Oh, this is a bit of a, intellectual text. I'm trying to break down. What is it about? We were in the Trump's first term, I think, when I watched it. So I was sort of thinking about, this is an attempt to address our then current situation. I watched carefully. I found I came away sort of a little bit annoyed at some of its choices in a way that I couldn't quite articulate. I found it a little bit annoying at some moments, kind of a character that I felt was not necessarily a fully realized character. He's a bit of a villain. He's a bit of a punching bag. Though at the same time, I enjoyed the character as a sleazeball that you get kind of interested in his deceptions. Of course, at first kind of scandalized by this depiction of this relationship, which feels like sort of pedophilic, and I think is kind of deliberately so. And the depiction of that made me, of course, uncomfortable. But, by the time we get around to the end, I saw there were these kind of redeeming qualities of the dialogue and, moments. And there was this kind of note the movie ended on, and I think it's very important. Well, it ends on a very odd note, actually, of kind of anyway, basically the movie ends with Mikey being kicked out of the house early. He's about to leave to go back to LA. He's kicked out of the house and he has his money taken. And so basically, in some sense, he's already kind of getting away with his crimes, but he's also being made to give back his money. He's being made to feels some kind of responsibility for what he's done and how he's exploited the people who have taken him in this neighborhood, which the two neighbors who have really helped him a lot in this situation have basically saved his life, and to whom he's never had any sense of respect. And then he's kicked out, and then he walks to Strawberry's house, where they're going to go and take a bus to Hollywood or to LA. And then when he arrives at Strawberry's house, we get the idea that maybe it's something kind of, it's a dreamlike appearance of Strawberry out of the front door of the house in a bikini with a strawberry pattern, and in a sort of sexy kind of music video kind of way. And he seems agape. And so, sorry for summarizing the movie, but anyway, it's just kind of like it's a moment that struck me that I think we should talk about. Kind of left me not knowing what to think. Anyway, basically, as I said, that was my first watch. Second watch, very similar thoughts. I think as I thought about the movie, and I think I spoke in favor of the movie last time, if not picked it, I can't remember. Basically, I found that it grew more in my estimation, particularly for that last part. The dream sequence was intriguing. And if it is indeed a dream sequence, which I have my own thoughts about, and also the ending of kind of him getting his comeuppance, in a sense, of being confronted by all of these people, and the kind of solidarity of the people in finally confronting him, I think is a kind of a cathartic moment that it spoke to me, and I did feel like it was a message somehow in a moment that I think we needed to see. That's something I don't necessarily see in other movies. There's something particular about that spoke to me. Okay, watching it again, I had basically almost the same reaction as I did the first time. I think there were many moments where I was sort of like off put. I was uncomfortable. I was sort of annoyed by some dialogue. There's moments in the movie that are like, I think, very improv based, which is sort of his style. I think he has some improv scenes that were kind of hit or miss for me, and sometimes kind of jarring. But anyway, some moments that I thought were great. And however, I find that honestly, it's not a question of lukewarm. It's meh, as Anthony said, or as Kirk said, fine. I don't feel it's just meh or fine. I feel like it's like, to me, it's either a really great movie or it's quite a bad movie. And I think mostly for reasons that Kirk was pointing out, about like, how do we think about, is this about Sean Baker's kind of like agency in making this movie, in participating in sort of framing this exploitation of being a white man. And we have this kind of white man character who even like, I don't know, like, what is trying to be said here? There's many ways in which it could be kind of cringe and kind of like misguided, I think, depending on how we interpret it. There's other ways in which we interpret it. It may be very interesting and very like, salutary or something like that. But I kind of don't know what to think ultimately. And I'm kind of split a little bit between those 2 points of view. So I'm curious to like discuss more and kind of get to the bottom of how I feel, and also how we think what the movie is trying to do.
I like how Connor gave me like an assignment. He gave me a task. He said, "All right, Tony, this is either a great film or a piece of shit, and you have to convince me." This is like what I went to law school for. This is like the guy either did it or you have to convince the jury that this guy didn't kill all those people. That's kind of where I'm at right now. Did Sean Baker in fact kill all those people? Is Sean Baker in fact Mikey Saber? Is that what's going on here? No, I think you've all made really good points. I appreciated what Kirk kind of bringing out, like the class element of this movie, which I think is so central to this film and to Sean Baker's movies in general. I haven't seen his earliest stuff, but I have seen Tangerine, I've seen Florida Project, and of course Anora. And Anora is kind of an outlier in the sense that Sean Baker's movies tend to really fixate on working class people or really poverty, and not even working class necessarily, but just poverty in America. That's kind of his main subject of interest. I find it very interesting that Anora is the movie that really broke through, when it's kind of a movie about wealth and about decadence. It's a movie that really is almost like the first half of that movie is basically like wealth porn before it kind of pulls the rug out from under you. And you can argue that this movie and Florida Project, for example, are kind of poverty porn in a way. That's kind of the criticism you could make. But these movies didn't break through in the same way that Anora did, which is very interesting. But I think Anora too, and I don't want to keep just talking about Anora. It's just I've seen that more recently. It's fresher on my mind, and it's interesting to see the parallels. That movie is also very like I think very conscious of class and very much is making like a statement about class in a similar way. I think you can tell that it came from the same brain, the same person with the same kind of priorities. For what it's worth, Sean Baker's always maintained, like in his public statements and in his interviews, that he makes movies that's kind of meant to highlight marginalized people and kind of give them a spotlight and kind of destigmatize people in marginalized positions, but undocumented people, sex workers, and so forth, people at the margins of society who maybe aren't featured super prominently in mainstream entertainment. As far as his own background, I mean, he grew up in New Jersey. His dad was a patent lawyer. His mom was a teacher. Sounds like kind of like a, middle class to maybe upper middle class background. He didn't grow up in this kind of poverty by any means, which some people will probably, use against him, which I'm not here to argue that there isn't an exploitative element to some of what he does. However, I think that there is a good intention there in the sense of, I do think his films are pretty empathetic to these characters. I don't think it's purely like, look at these people being silly. There's a scene, for example, where Mikey's looking out the window at his wife and his mother-in-law who are I'm not sure quite what they're doing. They're doing some sort of drug. They're doing some
I think they're smoking heroin.
Smoking heroin. Okay, that sounds about right. And he yells out, "Oh, great life choices, guys!" And then when his wife comes back in, she says, "Her doctor cut her pain meds, you fucking asshole." And I think that I mean, maybe that's a little bit too on the nose for some people. I don't know, but I think that speaks to an intent to not judge these characters and an intent to kind of present them as they are. And maybe there are instances in which they do things that we might find funny. I don't think that's inherently wrong or bad. But I think the intention is not to necessarily exploit. I think the intention is to say, hey, we really don't see poor people in movies. Why don't we? And even if this particular filmmaker isn't come from that sort of background, I don't think that's inherently like a bad thing to have that sort of impulse or to make a kind of class first approach to filmmaking. So I find it, I think it's well intentioned, even if the execution we can quibble at sometimes, which I'm sure we will as we go on. But I think that is certainly a part of the movie that I find interesting and that I respond to. There is sort of and again, I hate to use the word novelty because this is coming from that. You could use that against me and that poverty porn criticism. I'm not a person who grew up in anything like these sorts of circumstances. I had an upper middle class upbringing and but I think there is like I do find something striking and something engaging about seeing these sorts of things depicted on screen and just a matter of like, wow, like you don't typically see this in a movie. I think there is some value to that. So that part of it is definitely there. I think too that as Anthony said, it is a very me movie, especially when he kind of outlines the nature of this character, this kind of anti-hero character, and basically the charismatic liar who's basically spinning these schemes, spinning this web of lies, and just keeping the schemes, keeping the plans going, and trying to basically outrun the consequences until they eventually do strike him. That is very, Safdie brothers do a very similar kind of thing in their movies. And yeah, that's definitely the sort of thing that I like just subjectively enjoy. I find that very like entertaining. I also really enjoy like, scummy characters or characters that aren't necessarily meant to be likable. I think that this movie is really sold on the charisma of Simon Rex as the lead, where he's not, I don't want to say likable, but he is very like engaging to watch and very like hilarious. Like there's a lot of like, is this movie longer than it maybe needs to be if you look at what actually happens in the plot? Yeah, probably. But I can't think of any scenes where like there's not something funny or interesting happening. Like there's just so many little hilarious moments, like when for instance, like he's basically lying to this girl that he lives in this big, nice house with his mom. So he has her drop him off in front of this house in this like wealthy suburb. And he's done this several times. And then one night, the owner of the house comes out with a shotgun and says, like, if I see you one more fucking time, I'm gonna shoot you. And he looks like terrified. And it's just like it's such a great little beat. And then the next time they go out, he's like, oh, just drop me off at this gas station. That's fine. It's just a hilarious like comic beat. And this movie is so dense with just those great little moments that are just carried by the performances. And another thing Sean Baker does in his approach, he uses a lot of non-actors. This was about a $1.1 million is the budget for this movie. The crew had 10 people. It's shot on 16 millimeter film. It's got a very kind of DIY indie sensibility to it, and shot on 16, 16 millimeter is like we did the Blair Witch Project for our Halloween episode. Parts of that movie are shot on 16 millimeter, and 16 millimeter is known for being a little bit grainier, a little bit more like kind of rough around the edges looking, and not quite as, quote unquote cinematic as 35 or as lush as 35. But I think this movie is a great example of how like 16 can look absolutely incredible. I think the colors in this movie are gorgeous, and like he shoots the hell out of that landscape in Texas City and really makes just the colors, the lighting, the sun. I mean, it's a beautiful movie, which contrasts with kind of the quote unquote shabbiness of a lot of the set design and interiors. I think to a very aesthetically kind of satisfying effect. I think it's like good filmmaking. He has very strong instincts as far as the way the set design intersects with like the cinematography, the mise en scène. I think is incredibly strong in a way that to me, when I watch this movie, I find more kind of engaging on an aesthetic level than I do something like Anora, which is obviously very aesthetically refined and polished and well made. But that to me almost feels more like a music video in terms of this presentation. This to me feels much more gritty and much more full of kind of personality. It's got a smaller budget. It's got more grit. It's got more personality. Part of it too is the amateur actors and some of the people. And I think all of these people in this movie, like as far as the main cast goes, I don't think there's a weak link. I think everyone brings their A game. I absolutely love, and I feel so bad I always do this. Brie Elrod is Lexi Davis, the main character's wife, and I'm shocked Anthony didn't bring her up. He's always shouting out the female leads in our films. I thought she was fantastic, and no, but I thought she was great. I mean, I thought she brought so much color and life to that role, and I think she really does like ground the movie as far as giving our protagonist sort of a person, like a positive force or a person that we kind of want to see or should want to see him gravitate towards. And the way she kind of opens herself up to him throughout the movie before it brutally all falls apart towards the end, I think is just fantastic to see her really gruff kind of demeanor at the beginning and the way she gradually sort of becomes more warm, I think is absolutely fantastic. Same thing with her mother, the mother-in-law, who is Brittany Rodriguez as June. It's just great. And just there's so much like to me, like, and again, why I don't find it ultimately what I think really redeems this movie from some of the criticisms you could make of it is I think at the heart there is empathy. At the heart there is real emotion. There's that scene in the kitchen where June is basically begging Mikey to stay, and he's like, I can't have my daughter selling herself on Craigslist anymore, which makes it the stakes of the poverty, the stakes of the lives these people are living, it makes it so concrete. It makes it so real. She says it's dangerous. And it's like a thing I think we feel because that's the first time that's been said in the movie. And for the characters in the movie, that's just sort of that's the world they live in. They kind of take it for granted. That's just how it works. But for us as the audience, that there is some kind of like, oh man, like this is what's actually at stake for these people. I find that pretty powerful. I think too that you have to bring in there's numerous references, as Anthony brought up, to kind of history, and the history of the land. This is a movie very much about a place that's very much in a setting. It has an incredibly powerful atmosphere and sense of place. And there's a scene where Lonnie and Mikey go fishing, and Lonnie says, those are the killing fields over there, which, I wasn't familiar with the killing fields before seeing the movie, of the cards on the table, but, this is a place where over the years, like dozens of women have been found dead and no one knows who has killed them. We don't know if it's the same person. We don't know if it's just a place that happens to be convenient to get rid of a body or what, but this is like this really kind of sordid history of this land. and also Strawberry brings up the slave trade, that had kind of a hub where they live as well. So there's this connection to history, this connection to violence, that is, I think, the movie attempts to kind of draw a through line to the present day. Now, I think we need to talk about some of the way the movie does this. I don't know how successful it is at tying all this together. I think it's interesting. I think it enriches the film. I don't know if it could maybe do a little bit of a better job of it, because the other big kind of undercurrent here that people always seem to overlook is this movie's a period piece. This movie came out in 2021. It was filmed during the COVID pandemic. So it technically is a product of like the Biden era, or I guess it was released in the Biden era. But the movie, it's not set during the Trump presidency. It's set during the 2016 election. When the characters are watching television, you can hear them talking about the developing race. You hear at one point someone say Hillary Clinton with a commanding lead nationally over Donald Trump. That is a very interesting, very deliberate choice to make the movie a period piece in a way that, absent that one or two scenes of characters watching television, the movie never calls attention to it. So that's a very deliberate choice on the part of the director. So what are we to make of this? Is Mikey, is he Donald Trump? Is he where Donald Trump comes from? I would posit that this movie is trying to kind of paint a picture of America in its good and bad sides, to talk about the history of violence and how it gives rise to this very particular character, this very particular type of person who is like a big dreamer. Like Mikey's a dreamer. He's someone who seeks the American dream. He's a go-getter. He's an entrepreneur. He's someone who wants to make something of himself. And he is, admirable in this sense. He's an industrious person in this way. He's a person who schemes and plots, and he pursues those schemes and plots very aggressively and zealously, right? And this in America is meant to be a good thing. This is the model of some of our greatest entrepreneurs, right? In terms of maybe the personality profile. But Mikey is also grotesque. He's pathetic. He's sickening in terms of the specifics of what he's doing. He's almost a perversion of this idea of the American dream. He's a warped idea of the American dream. And I think the movie's drawing a connection between the violent history of the United States to kind of our present political moment embodied in Donald Trump, and I think it's a little bit boring to just say this is a movie about, why Donald Trump is bad. I think that's part of it too. But I think it is trying to, through this sort of character, through this sort of depiction, embody a certain kind of specifically American type. But the reason I say this movie isn't purely, just a negative thing or about a bad type of person, I think this movie also believes in the American working class in the way the movie resolves, where this community, who very notably are people of different races, people of different backgrounds, who share this kind of class interest, come together to expel this poisonous influence in their community without the involvement of law enforcement, for example. And there is something tremendously, like I got a big grin from Kirk.
You're trying really hard, Tony. I appreciate it. You're trying so hard. It's like, what are these, the Cree Nation? Like expel? I mean, there's nothing admirable. They ripped the guy off. He did honest work as a weed dealer, and they ripped him off.
You think it's admirable?
He sold to the union as his biggest crime.
Yeah, I mean, what they conspired to steal his $3,000 or whatever he had hidden. That's all that happened. I mean, granted, he did fuck. I mean, it's horrible how he treats Lexi and whatever Lori, but that wasn't the motivation of Leandria. She just wanted the money. I mean,
they give the money back to Lexi. They give it back to his wife.
I mean, they kept. You think
we never get the number, but they do keep part of it, and that's why she gives the mom gives him 200 of it.
Yeah, she pulls 200 off.
Okay, all right, fair enough. But Lexi does, call it on. I think it is intended to be a kind of a righteous moment. And we can quibble with the details, and also I think, to Kirk's point, Mikey's greatest crimes, which one we've already discussed, which is his sexual relationship with this high school girl, and then the car crash, where basically, to summarize the climactic moment of reckoning here, Lonnie and Mikey are in the car, Mikey says, "Oh, pull off the freeway." Lonnie just mindlessly, whips the car over 3 lanes of traffic. And then we later find out in the news there was a 22 car pileup in which several people wind up in critical condition and possibly dead. It's an over the top moment. I think it's very dramatically effective for what it's trying to do, if only because it gives us the moment where Mikey later finds out he's off the hook and he does this hilarious 30-second long dance outside. Just amazing, which I think that ties in. That's part of the American type. It's just avoiding responsibility, getting away with what you can, avoiding responsibility. That is what he embodies, and it's like a chilling, almost sociopathic moment, but it's so hilariously funny too. And that to me embodies what I find like so enjoyable about this movie and so tasty about this movie, is that combination of like this incredible real malevolence, if you look at what's going on, with this absurdity and silliness. But I find the climax of the movie where they kick him out, I find it like Connor said, I find it a cathartic moment. I think there is, I think it is like a ultimately a positive thing where they're expelling this. And I guess to get off my to get back to what I was saying about Kirk's point, they're not aware of these two greatest crimes. They're not aware of these two things that Mikey has done. They might be able to guess that he's maybe done some similarly bad things, but that maybe goes against my point a little bit. But I think that was the intent, and that's how I emotionally experienced in the movie. So okay, so I've gone on for quite a long time here, but I don't know what we want to explore first. First of all, the whole class. Anthony wants to
Oh,
jump, but I'll let Anthony take the lead.
I have a question then, since you guys saw it twice. Well, I could talk about the period piece, and I also want to talk about the ending because I have my own less positive reading and a quite conservative one of that about it. But I have a question, which is, to me, it seems like the real twist of the movie is not the traffic incident. It's not even, the fact that they steal the money back. It's that we get a scene with him and Lexi, and it sounds like, or she wanted him. I want to make sure I understood this right, so you guys could help me out. It sounds like she has a child that he's never asked about, at least up until this point in the film. She has to bring it up to him, and it sounds like she wants to have him come to the custody case or something with her. Is that child supposed to be implied to be his?
No.
Or okay, no, okay. I just
He
want to
says,
make
"Why
sure I
doesn't
didn't
the
miss.
dad
Here's
step
how
up?"
I read it.
Okay, I didn't hear that part, so I just okay.
Social worker chiming in here. Here's how I read it. She has a child through her previous partner, the one who left the white truck, I'm guessing, because the child's a kid, and he left, and the child's now in foster care. So neither the dad nor the mom have custody, and so
Okay.
she's working with CPS to get custody back, and she
Yeah.
thinks that having a stable household would do well for her case.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, so now that I have that cleared up, let me just chime in since I have the thought is about the period piece and about the ending, which is to get to the ending. I find that throughout the movie, there's not it's a much more simplistic take on the political situation that I honestly feel like you try to complicate it for, and I appreciate it, Tony, because they blame so many of his problems on the fact that he went out to LA to be the big shot Hollywood boy, as they repeatedly call him back. And where do they end up expelling him to is back to good old liberal cities that are taking over the country, which is the very first set of lines that we hear from the Donald Trump TV case in the film. And so I find that there's just kind of this idea of not expelling things to make things better for themselves, but of expelling things as if go back to your political pornographic, AVN awards, whatever it is, situation. Here's even the money for the bus to go specifically to the city in good old California, liberal country, right? So I do feel like there's a much more kind of conservative type of angle there. But then it gets back to the period aspect, and I just had to bring this up because we're in the run up to the election of 2016. There are two things that bug me about that. One is I do not ever believe Strawberry would not have looked up this guy online in any capacity to be surprised by the fact that he has the career he does. I think she would have looked him up and had a kind of social media angle there because no girl at 17 is not doing that by this point in time. The second thing is we're in 2016. Fentanyl is not a crisis at all in Texas City, which is really surprising to me for a film about the exploration of poverty in some capacity. And number three, we are already in the period where OnlyFans has pretty much killed off any last semblance of the professional pornography industry. And I believe someone like Strawberry would actually know about that. I just found like a really weird character consistency that's not on the movie entirely, but feels like it should be addressed in some. Anyway,
So just to address your first point, and I'm not trying to dismiss all of these. Um, you're saying that she should have known before someone else brought it to her attention. She should have known like immediately because she does bring it up later in the movie.
she brings it up later, but I think the moment she meets any guy, I think a 17-year-old woman, 17-year-old girl would be looking all over social media, all over the internet for what this guy's about and have some capacity of who he is as a person that came to Texas City. I just find that very weird. I mean, I would think.
Yeah,
Are you
I get.
speaking? Never mind. Okay.
No, I think I get what you're saying. I think that to me, like because it eventually comes out, and she brings it up, to me that's like, I don't know. I don't really quibble with that. I will grant you the fentanyl thing. Yes, I feel like that should be something that he had the kind of presence of mind. And maybe this is like a virtue of the fact this is like an issue with someone from like a upper class, middle class background taking on these stories as they miss some of that context, or maybe that he doesn't, maybe a person like a truly working class filmmaker, the fentanyl thing would be very obvious to include, right? I mean, I think that is something you could argue that there is a lack of authenticity, I guess. And then I'm sorry, what was your last point? Oh, the OnlyFans thing. The OnlyFans thing. I mean, I think that, yeah, maybe Strawberry should be aware of that. I don't know. But I think to me, that only adds to the sort of the futility of Mikey's quest in the sense that he's sort of like a dinosaur. I don't see that as a flaw necessarily. I mean, you can say that Strawberry is maybe underwritten. I think she's just meant to be kind of naive, obviously. So I don't take issue with that as such. Another great moment with her that hasn't been addressed that I just want to bring forth real quick is the scene where she plays the piano and sings Bye Bye Bye, which is sort of this motif throughout the film. It's played at the beginning in the intro, and it's played at the end kind of in reverse, which is it's kind of an interesting like leitmotif. She sings this cover of it and she does this amazing job. She has this incredible voice, which adds to sort of the sense of like tragedy and corruption of what's taking place, where this is a person who clearly has some sort of talent, clearly has some sort of potential in another domain, and it's being corrupted by this other person. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that really quick because I think that's an effective moment. But okay, so does that resonate with you, Connor or Kirk? Did Anthony's criticisms kind of hold true? Does that undermine some of what the movie's trying to do, or what do you think?
Well, I just think on the OnlyFans, you can make the point that yeah, I mean maybe she's unrealistically naive, and so that obviously she could go into business for herself, but Mikey sort of wants a cut of it. But I think that that too, what Tony mentioned, also one detail is that she's using Facebook. So I don't know, maybe she's behind the curve. But to me, I honestly I noticed that as like that kind of dated the movie almost. But yeah, I don't know. I think that like as Tony mentioned, this scene, I think you made clear, Tony, like what the point of that scene is when she sings the song. Is to show that she has this other talent. I have to say, I wasn't a big fan of her voice, and I thought it was so like packed that she goes through like the whole song, and it's like, maybe it was almost intentionally like too perfect. It was very like, could have been a more like, kind of authentic or naturalistic, kind of scene, but it really wasn't. But with that being said, I think what that ends up implying is like, yeah, she's corrupted by sex work. Like this is a corrupting influence. She wouldn't have done it, right? It's like, and obviously, like, so I think the point of view of Sean Baker in general, right, is a complicated one about sex work, which does involve some amount of like old tropes of kind of the shame of sex work. I think he does a better job than probably anyone who has tried to treat the subject sort of in mainstream Hollywood. Obviously, like depictions of sex work have been, putting all of the blame on women, right? That kind of thing. I mean, there's a whole history to that. I mean, not all, but there's a lot of like tired tropes about like the fallen woman, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. I don't know really what to think about it, but I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. I really know what he's getting at, or where his perspective really is, and what he really cares about. But I guess I think Tony makes a good point. That is what he says. We can kind of take his word for it.
And I think there is an ambivalence there, because I think in his statements, and again, like, we got to take his statements with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, if we're abiding by death of the author, it's like, what does the movie say, right? What is conveyed by the text, right? But I think his intention is clearly to destigmatize sex work, and to kind of provide light onto these, again, people who aren't really, get to tell their stories in this way. And I think there's an element of that too. With early in the movie, Mikey does make an honest attempt to like get a legit job before he decides to sell weed. He goes to a number of job interviews, and the fact that he's been a porn actor for 17 years is disqualifying, right? So there is I think that is important, that, this stigma does kind of self-perpetuate some of these issues, or that stigma is what pushes him into this, life of crime. And now, obviously, had he gotten a job at the restaurant, I think we can assume things would go horribly wrong very quickly. But that should not have prevented him from getting hired at a Denny's or whatever, right? I think that is part of the point. But yes, I think the movie does ultimately, and Honora does this to an extent as well, kind of critical of sex work, in a way. I think in terms of the mechanics of the plot, in terms of what it does to the characters, even in things like, for example, there's a scene in the movie, another kind of comedic beat that comes up a couple times, is Mikey brags about receiving the best oral award at the AVNs, the best oral. So he received a blowjob the best. So the people he talks to in all these instances kind of make the point that, like, well, why are you getting an award for getting a blowjob? Like, you didn't do anything. And then he's describing it, and he's basically like, yeah, you have to really, like, you have to slap her around and make her choke on your, and he's describing these like really like kind of degrading, violent things he's doing. And like, that takes a lot of skill, and it's sort of like, it paints this kind of really sordid picture of like what that line of work is actually like. In the same way that, that scene I mentioned earlier with June, where she's saying, I don't want my daughter going back on Craigslist. It's not safe. And again, I think your mileage may vary. I feel like to some people, they're going to find that they're going to take issue with some of that, I guess. But I think that is, to me, I guess, just feels honest, I guess. I don't know. Like, I feel like, maybe we can talk about the abstract versus the reality. I think the reality of what's going on with these characters, I don't think anyone would not find it degrading to, like, for a middle-aged man to kind of try to coerce or charm a young girl into this line of work. I mean, and this is also something that's based in reality. So Sean Baker did a earlier film called Starlet, which was kind of focused on sex work and the adult film world. And this line that towards the end of this film, as kind of the kiss off, is Lexi. Yeah, so Lexi says to Mikey towards the end of the movie, "You're a suitcase pimp." And Sean Baker has said that the suitcase pimp, this is a guy, this is a type of guy, this is a male porn actor that is kind of like a parasite who will basically seek out these women to basically use to like drive forward their career. And they'll be like charismatic, they'll be like very slick, and they will try to basically charm these women into serving their own ends, financially, sexually, and so forth, right? This is a thing in the world, and I think we kind of all know it's a thing in the world, whether or not we know those particulars. So, like, yes, I do think there is an ambivalence about sex work as presented in this movie, but to me, that's not like a flaw with the movie per se. That just feels kind of real. And I think that as the movie presents this story unfolding, it never feels to me like a old school marm finger wagging cautionary tale. It feels like this is the honest implications of the story that we're seeing and the character that we're seeing.
I mean, it's not a very serious movie. Like, you're making it sound serious. Like, there's a lot of poignancy. Like, this movie's a joke. Like, let's be honest. I mean, it starts with NSYNC and ends with NSYNC. It's you talk about like where it's being in a certain place. Well, do you guys know about the Texas City disaster? Killed 546 people. It's the what is it? Yeah, it's the deadliest industrial accident in U.S. history. They couldn't bring that up. If he was so concerned about painting a portrait of this town, I mean, that's like having a film set in Columbine, Colorado, and not talking. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. Those were two lines. The Texas Killing Fields was one line, and the Black Ivory was another line in a 2 hour and 10 minute movie. So I guess I'm pushing back against some of your defenses, Tony. But I don't know. I don't think there's much here. I think it's a silly, absurdist movie. Like, and it's mostly exploitative. I mean, the class stuff, ultimately people aren't leaving the movie like saying, I have a more profound understanding of the lower class. They're saying these people are fucking idiots, which they are portrayed to be idiots and stupid. None of them are making rational decisions, by and large. I mean,
You don't think like Lexi, what does she do that's so irrational?
she's smoking heroin and she wants to get her kid back. Like, I don't know. That's pretty irrational.
I mean, being an addict, irrational. I mean, isn't that like a real thing? Like, aren't there millions of people like that?
I'm talking about how it's perceived, not in reality. I mean, and also addiction is not rational. It's rational in an ecological sense, but it's in terms of, there's a certain schizophrenia that's involved with addiction, not in the literal sense, but like a duality of minds.
Addiction's such a big part of that world, right? I mean, Anthony even said the movie didn't focus on it enough. I mean, I don't know. I guess I get what you're saying, but to me, like, I don't hold the movie responsible for like people go to see a movie and like, oh, they're gonna think less of. I don't know. I maybe I'm misrepresenting your point, but I don't necessarily think that's a flaw.
I don't know. I guess it's none of Sean Baker's business how a movie is perceived, and you're right. So maybe I'm being a little too, I don't know, a little too ridiculous with some of these claims, but I guess that's just my opinion on the importance of when you're dealing with these types of subjects. You have to have a kind of a gentle hand, and I feel like
it calls for a certain sensitivity. I understand what you're saying. You muted yourself.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Tony.
No, I didn't. I wasn't trying to cut off your point. No, I get what you're saying, especially again, is knowing some of his biographical information. He is kind of an outsider to this world, which you need to approach any kind of subject matter like this with a certain sensitivity and a certain humility. So I understand what you're saying. I guess the question of how much leeway and how much charity we're willing to extend the filmmaker, right? Which is going to depend on it's going to be downstream of certain like aesthetic things probably. But I don't know.
Well,
Anthony,
what's the genre? Like what is it? I think that could tell us a lot. Like, how would you typify this movie? How would you codify it?
That's a good question. I mean, it's a very comedic film for sure. Like, I agree with you. It is a highly comedic film. I think there are moments of seriousness, but I don't buy into that like binary necessarily that like it's purely serious. Like, it is a silly movie. It is an absurd movie. And some of the movies, again, like to me, I go back to that moment where he's dancing victoriously after he hears he's gotten away with potentially killing several people. To me, that's a hilarious moment. But if you think about it for more than 3 seconds, it's like horrifying. It's like borderline sociopathic. It's like the line where they're driving a car and he's like, oh, then Paul Walker had to get himself killed and that couldn't be in the sequel. It's just this, it's like incredibly callous, like oblivious thing to say. That's great. That's, to me, that's like, that is what that is an embodiment of this guy and this character. And like, how seriously do we have to take it? I mean, that's up to you. That's up to the viewer, right? I think that a movie can be very entertaining and fun to watch and also be like, okay, that said something. And like, I'm not saying you're whatever, you get what I'm saying. To me, it works on both of those levels, and it's as deep as we make it. It's as deep as we want to read into it. I mean, to me, the interesting question or the important question is how successfully does the movie tie all these things together? I think the intent is indisputably there, right? But you mentioned, for example, those two lines, and you're right. That's basically the extent of the historical context the movie provides. The question is how much work do those two lines do? What is the purpose of those two lines? Are those two lines sufficient to just kind of bring those ideas into our minds, make us kind of think about it, provide a little bit of context? And I wasn't familiar with this industrial accident that you mentioned in Texas City. I wasn't. I didn't know about it. So, maybe that's a fault of the movie. Maybe they could have thrown in at least another line about that or something, or a character who was affected by it or something. I don't know. That's going to be, the individual viewer's judgment call to make. And then there's the fact too of what role does our independent knowledge play? What role does our individual perspective as viewers play? So I don't know. What do you make of all this, Anthony? How much responsibility does Sean Baker have to kind of provide us this full context and really, in terms of its depiction of poverty, how much responsibility does he have for how he's doing this, and does he use it responsibly?
Well, I think there's a problem with the way we're assuming the movie wants to address this in the first place, which is we really have a certain set of impoverished characters. But one of the things that we need to address, well, one I should say is just to get your question, straightforward, is I don't think Sean Baker has a responsibility in that sense. I think it would be unfair to attribute any level of huge, extensive responsibility to how people change or don't change their perceptions of certain people, just because of it. Now, at the same time, I say that is I think we have a set of impoverished characters. We have our family. We have our main character portrayed by Simon Rex. Is that the actor's name? But I think we're actually really giving short shrift to Strawberry, who we've called naive, and she may be naive towards the potentially lurid factors about her relationship with him as an older man. But she's actually much more self-aware of everything than we've all given her credit for. She's the one who brings up the age first. She's obviously had experience in this, and then she's not even impoverished, maybe in comparison to like someone in Beverly Hills. But her family has this house that's kind of beautiful, actually. It's pink, it has this door. I mean, yeah, it's not, this multi-mansion that like we see in the other part of Texas City that he drags her to and pretends is his own home, but it's near the Galveston Beach, which isn't again the fanciest beach, but is pretty remarkable compared to the other people she's in. So this is a character who, again, is not fully fleshed out, but is also not in the same situation as all these other people and has a lot more going for her than maybe we've been led to believe. Right? I mean, even look at like her thing. She just has a summer job. She has the car her mom's giving her. There's a lot of factors here that aren't leaving her in the same state of the family or the people who are dealing drugs.
Yeah, I know. I agree, Anthony. I think that's a great point. And I think that, yeah, maybe we've given Strawberry a little bit short shrift here, but yeah, she does have the car. She seems to have kind of a comfortable middle class existence and is certainly privileged relative to some of these other characters that we're seeing here. But I do want to, and I don't want to close out the conversation just as it's opening. I do think that maybe we want to start to pivot towards the voting a little bit. I think that maybe we give kind of a final thought on the film. Where do we kind of come down on this movie, and are we going to vote it in? I'm gonna let Connor start us off. So Connor, in the light of these discussions, where has this is this in fact the worst movie of all time, or is it in the very best, say top two? Is it the top two movie of all time? That's really the discussion here. As you said, that's the frame that you established at the start. So why don't you go ahead and walk us through it?
Tony, I have to say, you've done your job as a lawyer in a fashion that is impressive. I was impressed. I think you made your case. For Kirk, you may have overstated your case, but I think Kirk understated his case to the extent that, like, no, obviously, I don't think just because the movie is funny, I don't think that it has these unserious, comical, maybe exaggerated characters, maybe characters we wouldn't actually see in real life, even. Though I think these characters are not completely out of the realm of the possible. But in terms of how they behave, but certainly it's exaggerated and it's comedic. Don't think that means the movie doesn't have ideas, doesn't have anything to say, isn't worthy of consideration as having distinct ideas. yeah, I have other kind of thoughts. I have other kind of lingering thoughts of various things, as you guys said. I was trying to kind of keep up with what you all were saying. I would say that though I didn't love my experience of the movie. There are moments where I'm sort of cringing. I'm sort of like, okay, to put it just in a more general way, I think the issue is not that it's like unserious. The issue is that almost that it is serious. That if this is or almost like the insertion of moments like the mention of slavery, or the mention of the killing fields, this kind of attempt to frame. And I love how it portrays this whole area, which I've never seen. I'm intrigued by this Gulf Coast area of Texas. I'm intrigued by that. I think there's definitely some ideas going on. It's interesting. It's more than it could have been. The framing of the refineries and the background of the houses. I mean, all this is very thoughtful, very thoughtfully done to me. But even though it's thoughtfully done, is it kind of like I don't know. I don't know what the word is. Misguided, sort of like surface level. Is it exploitative? I guess is another word. Is it sort of using this setting as a way of kind of making us gawk and then have a conclusion? Which honestly, and what might be kind of offensive to me is if you read this movie, and one way you can read it is a kind of parable of kind of the Trump voters turning against Trump. I think that's one way of like reading it. I know that's a very oversimplified way, and I think sure it's something that Sean Baker was trying to avoid. But obviously, and this is also, of course, false, this idea of the Trump voter being in the impoverished kind of rural parts of America, that's a bit exaggerated. But obviously, as a cultural image, we're familiar with that this is the kind of person who votes for Trump, the person who's making their case to Trump, people who are hopeless, who want the system to be changed. And I guess there's an idea of trying to show how this, there could be sort of an anti-Trumpian message. Of course, I don't mean to like make it all about Trump. I think that's doing the movie a bit of a disservice, but impossible to separate entirely. Anyway, the ideas here are very interesting. Cinematography, as you said, Tony, very interesting. I love the setting that it creates. There's more to be said. We haven't touched on the ending at all. I'm going to say it's a yes, though. It's a yes because I think the movie has very serious ideas. It executes on a lot of them. There's some things that are not my cup of tea, but I have to say, as I said last time, it's grown in my estimation after watching it. And I think there's something legitimate to that. There's a lot there to the movie, even if I didn't love every second of it.
Yeah, I think, and I've been in your shoes too. I think even if I'm ambivalent sometimes about a movie, if it makes me think, or if I see a lot of intention in what's being done, or I see a lot of interesting kind of elements at play, that can kind of put it over the top for me. So I can definitely sympathize with that. All right, Kirk, uh, what's going on? I'm not feeling good about it, but tell me how you're thinking.
No, I mean, the way I evaluate movies is I say, like, is there anything meaningful here for me to try to take away, right? Is there anything profound? And I didn't notice anything. And then my second option is this entertaining? Is this worth my time? And if this movie were 90 minutes, perhaps, but 210 is a little self-indulgent, let's be honest. So that's where I land on the movie.
All right, fair enough. I applaud Kirk for sticking to his guns. Didn't pull Kirk. Good for you. But all right, Anthony Shake, I
Yeah.
said. All right, Anthony. So you're in the driver's seat here. You have the
Yeah.
deciding vote. So you're Mr. Michigan, Mr. Wisconsin, whatever it is this time.
I don't know the last time I've seen Tony argue so hard for a film. I don't know the last time I've been in this position. It's like watching Horace and Pete and choosing Horace or Pete in this kind of moment. So, sometimes you watch movies and you like them because they have ideas that you like. Sometimes you like movies because they have ideas that you don't like, but they try to challenge you on stuff. And I say that all because hearing Connor talk at the end and hearing your pretty solid arguments, Tony. There were things I was watching this movie that you were arguing though, and I'm like, I just didn't see it. I didn't see Lexi as this deep of a character as you really pointed it out. Although I like certain moments that hinted at it, about her son, about the drug use, about her job, or her non-job, if you want to put it that way, the way she collected checks and so forth. But the part I think that really bugs me, I realize about this movie, is actually the use of these Trump like snippets, because we get these kind of moments throughout the film, and then towards the end or the latter third, we get the moment where he says, you know, the election's probably going to be rigged. This is a quote from 2016, and it's obviously meant to be kind of a double wink because the movie comes out in 2021, and it's like this double play about the way he talked about the 2020 election and so forth. But I bring that all up because I realize this movie's rigged. This whole time we've been buying into his fantasy, which is fine, and we've been seeing little pieces try to tear apart of it. But by the time we get to the end, what we're left with is just another fantasy, or just being back in it, the way he stares and sees Strawberry come out. And it's this idea that the people like, as Connor was saying, people like him who are able to talk so fast to get us listening, to leave us behind because they're just throwing a million lines a second that we have to catch up on one. Stay ahead in this world or figure out another way to kind of live on. Get away with it. It's fine. It's a typical kind of claim about, I guess, the US American dream. It's a claim, though, about this fantasy just enduring a little longer. And it just kind of bugs me. It kind of bugs me at this particular moment. If any of that made sense. And so I have to say is I do really applaud this attempt at having these big ideas. I don't necessarily feel like the big ideas were explored for such big ideas. And so I have to say a kind of soft no. Although I was almost convinced. Almost. Another 30 minutes, I may have been on your side, Tony, but court case another day.
I feel like Patrick Mahomes after the most recent Super Bowl. So close, just had it in my grasp. No, it's okay. I appreciate what you're saying, Anthony. Enough about Red Rocket. We're gonna look forward to the future. We got more movies to cover. We got a long way to go to fill out our canon, unfortunately. So with the rejection of this film. So let me think. Who went least recent on this?
I've been on a
program?
cold
On a
streak.
big loss streak.
Anthony on a cold streak. So let's see if he can get back in the game. Anthony, what order do you want to call it? And also, real quick, and if you want to summarize the Kirk protocol, please do as well for our
Yeah.
audience.
I'll have you do it, Tony, but I'll just say, I've been on a cold streak, but I've been throwing out a lot of bold ideas. A lot of people are responding to them and just disappointed by the way things are happening. So I'll go last. Connor could go first, Kirk second.
So were you channeling Trump there for a minute? Many people are saying I have the most brilliant picks. So yeah, the Kirk protocol for the noobs in the audience is once a person has pitched a movie from a given decade, that decade has been claimed for this particular round. So Connor pitches a movie from the 90s, no one else can, for example. So you said Connor first, correct? All right, go ahead, Connor. Take it away.
Okay, I'll make it easy for you guys, and I'll pick a decade I imagine the two others won't suggest, but I could be wrong about that. I'm going to recommend Frank Perry's 1962 David and Lisa, sort of a romantic comedy. Very simple. It's a story of love taking place at the mental institution, I believe in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I don't want to say too much about it. It's a very straightforward love story, but I think it's a very, very beautiful story. Interesting depiction of like mental health at the time, obviously a little dated in its way, but I think in a way that will really speak to you, Tony. I think you're going to have I think I'm going to get some tears out of this one. I can just feel it. And I think Kirk will have an angle on it as well, from a point of view of mental health, social work, from all kinds of angles. And I think Anthony will have an angle. I'm not sure what his angle is yet. But I think there's certain things that are going to charm Anthony as well. But I think you're just going to like this movie. That's all I can say. And I don't want to, kind of talk too much about it this time.
All right, interesting. That looks like a good one. But I will go. We've really kind of covered our bases with a lot of these directors. One director we've missed, and I'm sure he's been nominated, and this film might even have been nominated. Michael Mann. We haven't done a Michael Mann movie. Please tell me we haven't. Otherwise, I'll send.
We did Collateral.
Did we? No, we didn't.
Look it up. We did Collateral.
Okay, you have to cut this part. All right.
I'm not
All
cutting. Right. I'm not cutting when you said E.T. I cut when you said E.T. was from the 90s.
You have to nominate Collateral now, Kirk.
No. Okay. I'm going to change tact here.
I love Michael Mann, so you might be shooting yourself in the foot by changing tact.
Okay, well, let me just confirm. Okay, fine. I'll go with Michael Mann still. I'll stick to my guns. I'm not afraid of pie in the face, egg on my face, all that. 2006 is Miami Vice. So, we had the view of LA, very sprawling, very detached, almost dystopic at times with its depiction of the various areas, El Monte and all these places. And it all happens at night. I think there's a yin and yang situation here with Miami Vice, which came out 2 years later. Obviously, the common variable is Jamie Foxx. I think Miami Vice is not as well received as Collateral because it has a very confounding and at times ludicrous plot. And there are these jumps that are made throughout the movie that seem to be made without care for the audience and their understanding of what's going on, which I think is really funny for a blockbuster film to have that in 2006. But, I think Miami Vice is one of the fucking coolest movies of the last couple decades. It's really cool. It just exudes a certain aesthetic that we can all relate to in terms of its popularity, its place on the cultural totem pole. Driving around in Ferraris at high speeds, chasing narco terrorists or whatever. I think there's a lot there. It's one of the best soundtracks, I would say, of the last of this millennium, I should say. And it kind of carries on the tradition of Heat with some excellent sound, sound design, or however you might want to call that. I don't know what it's called in the world of cinema, but just the way the guns pop, the visceral, real feeling, like the heaviness of some of those gun scenes is unmatched to this day, I really feel like. And so for a variety of reasons and many more, I'll recommend Miami Vice.
All right, Anthony, bring us home.
Yeah, so okay, so after hearing that Kirk's pick, I want to go with something a little smaller. Something that I feel deserves some spotlight. It's a film from 2013 called Coherence. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but it's one of the most remarkable, I guess you technically call it sci-fi, but one of the most remarkable sci-fi mystery films I've ever seen. But it's directed by this guy named James Ward Burkett, who had a little bit of experience working in film. He did like some like random story things. He did some stuff on like Pirates of the Caribbean, then Rango. But he decided to take the money he earned and put it into a kind of passion project. And to this date, it's the only film he's ever directed. But Coherence is about eight friends at a dinner party when a comet kind of rises over the kind of neighborhood and a weird set of events follow. It's a film that kind of disorients you. It leaves you sort of uncertain about what's going on. And it does really make for a kind of unsettling sort of experience in a way that kind of evokes a lot of sort of, I don't know, philosophical thinking about yourself and the larger world around you, but in a way that is also just viscerally exciting. I can't remember the last time I had my heart pump during a movie at home like this. Maybe the very first time I ever saw Blair Witch Project on like my laptop in college or something. But it kind of has that sort of similar vibe, rises way above the small budget it has to be something kind of pretty remarkable. So anyway, 2013, 2014's Coherence. Let me double check that. 2014. 2013. Okay. 2013 Coherence.
Okay. Very strong round of picks. Everyone's selling very well. Let's do a quick round of rebuttals, and then I will render my verdict.
Yeah, so just I remembered for David and Lisa. Again, I've sort of made the point. I don't want to belabor it too much. It's an amazing love story. It's about what it means to be able to get close to someone. Obviously, it's in a particular environment. It's going to delve into issues of the psychology of love, intimacy, this kind of thing, in maybe a sort of exaggerated way based on its context, but in a way that I think will speak to anyone who watches it. And obviously that's very different from our two other movies. We have like a sort of maybe thriller, maybe, sort of, suspense kind of movie in Anthony's case. Which honestly, hearing about it, it gave me chills just how unexpected it was, for Anthony to bring it up. And I'm very intrigued. I'm very like mystified. I'm very curious about what this movie is. And as for Kirk's Miami Vice, I have not seen it. And I have to say, kind of embarrassed to say, but I'm not really a man. We've watched some Man on this podcast. I've watched some Man with Tony, who is a man. Sometimes in person, I like Thief. I think I've seen Heat, but anyway, I'm surprisingly kind of vague on Michael Mann. And I don't like. I've never been really gripped by a Michael Mann movie, so this may be my chance to be gripped. But obviously, it's the one. Even though it's not as well received as Collateral, you said, Kirk. I mean, it sounds like the one that almost is the one I feel like I hear about the most. But I could be wrong. I'm not a man. As I said, I'm not an expert, but that's my rebuttal.
Yeah, it's definitely come around in the last 10 years. People, film circles are very very intrigued by it. But yeah, Miami Vice, Tony, I'm not going to say anything you don't know about it. The other two films sound very intriguing, very interesting, especially, well, Connor's definitely yours, but also Coherence. I don't know. I'm curious how that plays out or what's going on there. But yeah, good choices all around. Well done.
Yeah, I think I've never even heard of Connor's film. It just sounds like up my alley. Sounds like the type of thing I'd buy on Criterion during their 50% off sale or something. I'd love for a chance to go through Miami Vice. Like Connor, I have reservations about Man. I like what I like and am middling on pretty much everything else. I have not had the chance to rediscover Miami Vice like the internet seems to. So maybe there's something there. Coherence, I say this a lot, but it is really a movie that's best going to it when you really don't know much about it and where it's going to go and where it's going to take you. So I think there's a chance for a return to kind of doing a kind of thriller again, in that sort of capacity, which may be also a vote for Miami Vice, in some way. But I'll just say the other thing about Coherence is it's like 90 minutes, which is always kind of nice. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Gotta love tight 90. To me, movie's got to be 90 or under or 180 or longer. Those are the two. So I guess Red Rocket wouldn't qualify, but you know what I mean. That's the general thing I feel. I will say to Connor real quick, we saw Heat together on 35 millimeter, had a lengthy conversation about it. You seemed to really like it at the time. He bails.
He left.
He left in shame. David and Lisa actually sounded like that was a really strong pitch. Very tempted by it, and it's always good to do an older film, especially when I haven't heard of. I have seen Coherence. It's been a long time.
Nice.
Definitely want to check it out again. I think, especially since the others haven't seen it, that would be a very cool pick. It'd be kind of a different, something a little bit different than what we've done in a little while. Can't remember the last, I guess, like you said, science fiction. I guess can't remember the last science fiction movie we've done.
E.T.
I guess never mind. I take that back. We just did. So you're out. Or was qualified. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I guess E.T. And then Miami Vice, though, man, that's just that's so hard to turn down Miami Vice. I mean, we have to do it at some point. We have to do a Miami Vice episode. But I think I am going to give it to Coherence. I think it'll be good. I think it'll generate some good discussion. I think it's a movie that had some buzz around the time it came out, which is, I cannot believe it's been over 10 years now. I feel old because it feels like that just came out. But it got some good discussion at the time, but I feel like it's not a movie that like I really have heard about recently. Connor, did you bow out in shame when I told you about our conversation about Heat?
I had a poorly timed, as Tony was calling me out for being a bad friend, my phone ran out of battery. That's weird. Anyway, but
He picks Miami Vice.
You picked Miami Vice. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
No, I did not. Connor.
Oh, you're holding off. Oh, okay.
No. You made a very strong pitch. I really want to see that movie. You tempted me for sure. But I am going to go with Coherence, Anthony's pick. I think it'll be a good discussion. So
Coherent Vice is what I like to call it.
David and Lisa's Coherent Vice.
Yeah. Well, this is cool. I will say too, is just last thing before we forget, we will probably do Miami Vice one day, but Public Enemies is going to be the true film I want to see someone
That's a
defend.
rough one. I don't know if I don't know if I'm ready to mount a defense of Public Enemies. We'll see.
All right. Well, until then, I'll have what she's having.